Hello. In this webinar, we are going to take a look at AWS Glue DataBrew. This data preparation tool provides a visual interface that enables both technical and non-technical users to analyze data quickly and easily. My name is Andre and I'm a solutions engineer at the Information Lab. At the Information Lab, we work extensively with Tableau, Alteryx, and AWS, and we have partnered with all three of them in order to provide our customers the right tools for the right job. Now, what is this session about? In this webinar, we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about the features of AWS Data Brew. We're going to take a look at the pricing model as well, which is a little bit different than, for example, Tableau, Prep Builder, and Alteryx. We're going to do a quick hands-on demo to actually show you how the product works. We're going to look at some of the automation sides as well to automate the processes that you create. So Data Brew is a fairly new service from AWS, and it allows data scientists and data analysts to clean and normalize data so that it's ready for analytics and machine learning. So as I said, we're going to dive into some of the features. So first of all, what is Data Brew? Now, Data Brew falls into the analytics section of AWS, specifically under AWS Glue, which has been a service that's been around for a while. AWS Glue is a serverless data integration service that makes it easy to discover, prepare, and combine data for analytics, machine learning, and application development. Now, with AWS Data Brew, AWS claims you can get to your insights and your analytics 80% faster because you're using visual exploration and a no-code solution. And it's very much focused on data analysts and data scientists. Now, there are more than 250 pre-built transformation steps. So we can think about filtering, transposing, pivoting, date functions, all of the ones that you kind of expect in a data transformation and data preparation tool. Now, the big benefit of AWS Data Brew and AWS Glue is that it runs in a serverless environment. This means that there's no infrastructure for you as a user to manage. AWS Glue provisions, configures, and scales the resources that are required to run your data integration jobs. You will only pay for the resources your jobs use while actually running. Now, how can we get started with AWS Data Brew? Well, first of all, you don't have to install anything. You work through the AWS Console. And you can also use the CLI tools to further automate your processes in CloudFormation, for example. But in order to get up and running, you need to create an AWS account. You need to set the correct IAM policies for your users so they can access Data Brew through the console. Now, you can also integrate Data Brew with your Jupyter notebooks. We're not going to tackle that in today's session, but that would mean that you can use Data Brew from within Python notebooks. Now, this is how Data Brew looks the first time you will open it and you connect to some data. This is some statistics about the different columns in your data set. You will read about the data quality, the distribution of the data, and you get some insights around it as well. And you can do this per column that you have. Now, another good thing about AWS Data Brew is that you also get Lineage. You get immediately an insight into where your data is coming from. In this instance, we see data is coming from an S3 bucket, and we have various data sets that are being combined into a project. This project has then a weekly running job which outputs to another S3 bucket, which can then be picked up by business intelligence tools, for example. You also create recipes. Now, what are these recipes and projects? Well, there's a little bit of terminology around Data Brew for me as well. As I mentioned, I work extensively with Ultrix, so for me, wrapping my head around this terminology was an interesting challenge. But we start out with data sets. Data sets are basically your data sources and connections you use for creating your projects. So that is the data that you want to be cleaned or combined, and that needs to be ready for analysis. Now, the core element of Data Brew is a project. And a project, as I said, is the centerpiece of your analysis and what you do in the tool. Now, you will always see a sample of your data set. So if you're familiar with Tableau Prep Builder, you will also recognize that you will be working on top of a sample. This sample by default, I think, consists of the first 500 rows, but can be configured to be larger. Then we also have the recipes, and a recipe is a set of transformation steps, which can basically be reused across different projects. And these recipes you can also create programmatically, which is very useful. You can do that through the through the AWS command line interface, the CLI, or by using one of the SDKs, so the software development kits. There's also a Data Brew API, and then you can also create these recipes. Now, the last bit here is the jobs. Jobs, as the term might already indicate, is that this is around automation and actually outputting your data into an Amazon S3 bucket. So this is, for example, the lineage that I'll show you and we'll build out in the demo section, where we have an S3 bucket where we have some data. Then we have a project. The project actually creates one big recipe. And then we have a job running, which then outputs the data to a subfolder of the same S3 bucket. Now, you're probably wondering as well, is like, how can we start monitoring this? As I mentioned, Data Brew runs completely serverless, so there's no overhead of having to manage your servers. There's no need to patch your server because you don't actually have to do that. Often this comes at the cost of not being able to monitor what you're doing. However, with AWS Data Brew, you have the ability to access CloudWatch and also the CloudWatch events that are related to that. CloudWatch is basically where all the monitoring happens across different services in AWS. You can also take it further and use CloudTrail. CloudTrail logs all the API calls and actions that are taken by specific users. Now, and also an important element when we talk about these types of products is the pricing. And the pricing is a really interesting approach. It's a very AWS way of pricing the product. It's again based on usage, so there is no upfront cost, and there is a free tier. So the first 40 interactive sessions are free, and an interactive session lasts for 30 minutes. Basically you are billed while you use the product. So if you don't use the product, you're not paying for it. We do have to split that pricing into a few categories. We have an interactive session, so that's actually you in the AWS console doing the transformation steps, working with your data. And as I said, that's a session is for 30 minutes and costs, depending on the region you are, about $1. So that means if you are using the tool for, say, an hour, you're paying $2. Now, we also have the Data Brew jobs. Now, the jobs, they take a lot more resources because that's actually the point when you start automating it and you're actually outputting your data. There is another kind of cost related to that. plus any of the additional costs. So imagine you're reading and writing to S3. You also need to add those costs on top of it, plus any of the other costs you will do. So for example, if you use Redshift or you use, say, QuickSight as the BI solution, those costs need to be taken into account as well. But the most important one is that an interactive session lasts for 30 minutes and costs $1. An example of this, as I said, 30 minutes, $1. So if you have $2, not that complex. The moment you start looking into the jobs, that's when you start consuming more, in this case, what they call nodes. And you can see here there's a little bit of a calculation that you'll spend about 48 cents if you run a particular job for 1/6 of an hour. Okay, so that's the pricing of the product. Let's now jump in and we'll go into the AWS console and take a look at how the product works. So we are now in the AWS console. I'm already logged in, and you need to make sure that you're in the correct region where you want to go to. I'm staying here in Ireland, and we're now going to take a look at AWS Data Brew in the console and where we can find it. We can use either the search on the top or go to all services and we'll find AWS Glue DataBrew in the analytics section. Yeah, as I already mentioned when we were looking at the slides, is that AWS Data Brew allows you to create a visual data preparation tool. And we work with things like data sets, projects, recipes, and jobs. You see those on the left-hand side of the screen here. Let's first of all start by creating a project. And here there are quite a few things to fill in. Let's give this a project name, and let's call this AWS webinar. Basically the recipe name is automatically filled in as well. The next thing is to select a data set. So we have this section called My Data Sets. We can see I have some data in here already. We also can connect to some sample files. So AWS has provided us with some dummy data that you can use and then kind of play around with. For example, I've used the ones around the popular baby names, and they are in different file formats, so you can see how that all works. What we are going to do is we're going to create a new data set. We can give this a name, so let's call this AWS webinar data. And we then have a check on the left-hand side where we can kind of specify where our data is coming from. We can connect to Redshift. You can set up JDBC connections to other database technologies. Then we have S3, Redshift, RDS as well. So if you have a RDS, I don't have any databases at the moment. An external data connection that you can connect to is Snowflake, a really popular database at the moment. So you can also connect to all your Snowflake data sets that you have and do some data preparation on top of that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click Amazon S3. We need to specify the bucket where I have this stored. So I have a bucket called Data Brew. Of course, for you, this will be different. And in here, we can then start looking for our data. In this instance, I have this 2019 week 1 CSV file, which contains some car sales data. It's a data set that my colleagues at Prepin Data, which is a project, a social project, in which people basically use Tableau Prep Builder to do weekly challenges with data. And I've chosen kind of the first week just to see how I could use Data Brew with data from those challenges. At the moment I'm selecting just one file here at a time. We can also do kind of wildcard searches, kind of these dynamic parameters. So you can say, for example, we only want to include files that have been entering the bucket in the last hour or so. So imagine you have some kind of automation flow that reads every hour or every X amount of hours from this bucket. You can also say only grab the latest one from there. That's not really what we want to do. We can also specify the number of files to include. In this instance, I'm just going to select this one particular CSV. Then need to tell it what type it is. CSV, of course, you also have TSV, so you need to specify the delimiter. In this case, I have a comma delimited, but if you have TSV, it will be a tab, for example. But yeah, that's all pretty straightforward. If your data contains headers to identify which what the data actually is, you specify that here as well. I mentioned previously about the sampling. By default, it's 500, and it literally just grabs the first. You can also change that to a last or a random. So if you want to kind of do that, we're just going to stick to the defaults here. That's all right. Tags, very AWS. You can add tags to everything if you want to do that. What is important is this permission. So you need to give it a permission. So that means that Glue Data Brew can go into the S3 bucket and actually grab the data. For that, we already have one. And we're going to hit Create Project. Now, what this will do is it will start creating this project, and you can already see kind of half of the interface here. This typically takes about, as the description here says as well, about a minute. Basically what it will be doing, it starts up your compute instance. So you get your own little instance on which this session will run. This is also when you actually start paying for the usage, right? So when we created the project, you're not really paying for it. Once you enter this particular interface and the compute engine is running, that's when your session kind of starts. Again, it will, as we can see, it will start using your sample data. Of course, when you start outputting and automating it, it will use the full data set, but it's quite a popular thing in data preparation tools nowadays to work with sampled data. Now, once this has loaded, the interface to me feels very much similar to Tableau Prep Builder. We have very center stage here. We have the actual data. On the right-hand side, the recipe starts building up. So you'll see when we start doing some processing, we see that happening. And we have kind of the functions and the transformations that we can do on the top. So we see things like the pivoting, the joining of tables, that's bringing multiple data sets together. Unioning is also bringing multiple data sets together, but then making your data set taller. And we can do all kinds of things here. So these are kind of fairly standard data preparation functions that you kind of expect from any tool. What is kind of interesting, I found, is that it has these, the grid, we have the schema, and we have the profile. So if we click on the schema, it's actually, as the name says, it's just displaying this schema. It has elements like data quality, indicating if there's like rows missing or if there are null values. You can even see the distribution. So for example, this data set contains dealers that sell different cars in a particular month, in a particular year. We can see the data types in here. Of course, we can also change them, which is fairly straightforward. And then we can see the distribution as well, right? So we can see from these dealerships, we have 2, A and B, and each have 50% of the data. Then we can also see the value distribution of the sales. So this might be an interesting thing to look at which car has been sold kind of in different kind of months and year combinations. We also have this profile. I haven't looked too deep into this, but we can take a look in a bit. Another thing to mention here is the lineage. So if we click on lineage, at the moment, because we're not really outputting anything, we can see that we have an input bucket, which has one data set, which has one project, which has one recipe. But this can, of course, become bigger and bigger if you have more data sets, if you have data coming from more data sources as well. All of those will show up here. Cool. So if we go back to the project, we can just to mention here on the left-hand side, we have everything that we kind of want to look at. So for example, these are the data sets that we looked at earlier. I've already mentioned that I used this baby names data set previously. The project itself, so I start playing with some sample data here. And then we have the recipes that you can kind of reuse across different projects. Jobs in this instance is for actually automating your work, but we'll do that at the end. So if we hop back into our AWS webinar project, what we want to do is let's first start creating and making these dates look a little bit better. Because if I scroll to the right, we can see we have a month and we have a year in individual columns. If you start using business intelligence tools, you often want those in one particular column. So the next thing that we want to do is actually clean this the dates up. So we have month and we have year, and they are in separate columns. But if we want to use this in a business intelligence tool, often you want to combine these into, say, one particular column. So what we're going to do is we go to functions, and we're going to use a date function. The function that we're going to use is datetime. And in here we can create do some transformations on these date fields. Datetime, it returns a new column with the date and the time specified. Okay, so we specify the year, so that's my year. Specify the month, which is, we can select a column, which is my month. Now we don't have a kind of starting day, so we'll just probably let's select that as a 1. Hour, minute, and then we can specify the date format. This really depends on what you use, is because we have ISO dates, US dates, we have UK dates, different date formats. And for example, this one's pretty standard. With everything you do in Brew, you can apply it to all the rows, or you can also do it on kind of the filtered rows. So you can apply filters to it and then apply the transformation. All these steps also have preview changes. So if we click on that one, it will actually give me an error message. So actually, there we go. I think we should now preview the changes. We do have to fill in a value here. So if we just set those to say 1, and then hit preview changes again. What it now will do is it will start previewing, and we can see, there we go. We have datetime column 1 here, because I didn't specify an output. So let's rename this to say date. And then we can hit apply. And what that will do is it creates a kind of step in our data preparation flow. And we can see this is the first step that has been applied. You can also see the new field ends up on the right-hand side. And we can see all of kind of the correct dates here. So we can see 2018, month 1, month 2, that's all correct and using kind of the first days. So in theory, we could get rid of this sold month. So we can use the drop down here. And then we can say delete. There are quite a few places where we could do all of these things. It actually just asks us to confirm this on the right-hand side. So we can, in this instance, also remove more of the fields that we want. So we could also say our year, for example, if we want to do that. Hit apply. And now we will only have that new date column that we created. All of the steps are on the right-hand side. What you'll also see is if you click on more, you can download these recipes as files. Like anything on AWS, you can also use these in kind of follow-up scripts that you write. You can download them as YAML or JSON. Next thing that we want to do is let's have a look at how these kind of sales columns are specified. So we can see we have red cars, silver cars, black cars, and blue cars. In order to analyze that, and for example, to see the total sales across these, we ideally want to change the orientation of the data. So we want to pivot our data. So we can hit the pivot tool, and here's some nice visual indicators as well as what's happening. To me, this was a little bit confusing. We have rows to columns, we have columns to rows, and another columns to rows, where we have pivot, unpivot, transpose. In this instance, they have some nice kind of interface. If you click on these items, you'll see what's happening. The unpivot columns, so we use a drop down. Those are the fields that we want to kind of pivot. So red cars, silver cars, black cars, and blue cars. Then the column name. So let's call these cars. And the value, let's actually call that sales. We can see that there is this preview changes. So we can then see what is going to happen without actually applying it. And now we can see that indeed it has changed the orientation of the data. We have the dealership, then we specified that the ones that we are changing here becoming our cars. We have the sales followed by the actual date in there as well. Again, a little toggle here to view only the affected columns. For example, if you have lots and lots of columns that you're working with, you might want to toggle that one. And let's hit finish. Okay. Now imagine we want to do some kind of follow-up here, and we want to aggregate this data. So rather than seeing the data by, say, every day here, let's kind of, every month and dealership. What we could do is, for example, aggregate this. So we click on the kind of the group function here. This is where you can start summarizing your data and kind of aggregating it up to a different level. So we want to say maybe for each dealership and each car, as in the group bys, we want to add another column. We want to see all the sales. So kind of removing the element of date here. And then we want to sum up the sales. And let's call this sum of sales. Yeah, that's fine. What you can do is you can group these as a new table. So that will replace the complete table that we already had. Or we can group them as new columns. So they are being added or appended to the existing columns that we already have. Again, this really depends on how you use this in like your business intelligence tool, because now the granularity of the data source is on month and dealership and cars, but this sum of sales is actually on the dealership and car level. So with this, you can go and create quite some nice transformations to your data. Let's hit finish. And now we can see that new column has been created. Okay, so as you can see on the top, we have quite a few options, very common ones like apply filtering to your data. You can further format the data. Again, fairly similar to what we see in other tools, uppercase, lowercase, date functions. Cleaning. Cleaning is, again, a very important thing that you do in data preparation. You can remove things like punctuation if you work with like data that has some of those things in. Missing. What do you want to do with missing values? Also a very important question. You want to fill them with nulls, or you fill them with kind of the in this case, the last valid value also might be interesting. So we have quite a lot of options here in terms of kind of really visually cleaning and preparing our data. Now, the next thing that we want to do is actually create a job to output this. So if we hit create a job, we're going to call this, let's call this AWS webinar as the job name. We can then specify how we actually want to update this. So we can write it to an S3 bucket, and then you can do whatever you want with it after. In this instance, we have the different file types that we can output it as. In this instance, let's just keep it as CSV. We can then write it to a particular location. I'm just going to put it in the same folder as the same bucket as the data is coming from. You can set up different, if you want to compress the data or if you want to set some delimiters, that's possible as well. And then also you have these other options, right? So you can set some specific elements to how many nodes you want to allocate to this job. So if it's important and it needs to run really fast, you might increase this. If you don't want to run this very fast, if it's infrequent, you might lower this a little bit. And then you need to, of course, give it some permission. So I'm going to use the same role here and run this job. Now you will see that it actually starts running. In the top right, we can see one job in progress, and this is the moment it goes to and outputs the data. So if we go to job details, you can see we've now manually triggered it. You can also set it up on a particular schedule. You can see the runtime. At the moment, it's like running for like only a few seconds. And we will be able to see when this finishes. We will go to the S3 bucket and locate it. There we go. So let's see. It's still running, but let's go to the output. We can see the output here. If we then click on it, it goes to the S3 bucket. We see it's not there yet, so let's go back. Well, it's running. Let's go to the data lineage, and we can see that that one has actually indeed updated. Oh, actually, it has now finished the job as well. But we do see now more added to the lineage here. So we see the job and we see the output bucket as well. So let's go to the bucket, let's refresh it, and indeed there it is. The AWS webinar has created a kind of a folder for us, and in here we have the output CSV. Okay, so yeah, thanks a lot for joining this session about AWS Data Brew. I'm quite excited about the capabilities of this tool. It's still very early days with it. It was released a few months ago, but I can see some real benefits to using this serverless approach to data preparation. If you have any questions, then put them in the chat. This video is also on YouTube, so you can also put any comments you have on in the YouTube chat. Thanks a lot for listening.